every world, there are stories hidden beneath the surface, and if you enjoy uncovering them, you're always welcome to stay and subscribe. Tonight, we begin with one of them. There is something very quiet about a story that begins after the victory. Most fantasy journeys begin with a summons, a prophecy, a threat, a dark lord, a rising storm. They begin with movement toward a climax, with heroes still incomplete, with roads still opening. Frieren begins somewhere else. It begins after the Demon King has already been defeated, after the long journey is already over, after the world has already been saved, and after peace has returned to the land. The official description says it as plainly as possible. The adventure is over, but life goes on. And from that single choice, the entire atmosphere of the story changes. The woman at the centre of that atmosphere is Frieren, an elven mage who travelled with the hero Himmel, the priest Heiter, and the warrior Eisen. On the surface, she has already done the impossible. She helped defeat the great evil. She stood at the centre of legend. She crossed the kind of distance that would define most fantasy heroes forever. But Frieren is an elf, and because she is long-lived, what was a 10-year epic for her human companions becomes, for her, only a brief passage of time. That difference in scale is the first quiet wound in the story. When the story returns to the old party after 50 years, Frieren herself has scarcely changed. The others have. Their bodies have aged, their time has narrowed, their faces now carry the weather of human life in a way Frieren's face does not. And then comes one of the gentlest and most important emotional pivots in modern fantasy. Himmel dies, and Frieren realizes she does not really understand what she lost. She realizes she travelled beside people she never truly learned to know. The funeral does not simply make her sad, it makes her aware of her own distance from ordinary human time. That is the mood I want to rest in for a while, because it explains almost everything that follows. Frieren is not sent on a new quest, because the world is crumbling. She moves because she now understands that she passed through something precious too lightly. She wants to understand people, memory, and the density of a human life that can unfold and end, while to her only a handful of decades have passed. The journey ahead is not really about defeating a final enemy. It is about learning how to look backward without being empty, and that changes the texture of every landscape in the series. Roads are no longer only roads, they are also echoes. Villages are not just places to pass through, they are places where time is stored at different speeds. Ruins are not only remnants of old civilizations, they are a repository of feelings Frieren once ignored. Even small magic is transformed by this shift, because magic in Frieren is never just force. It is often memory, habit, whim, inheritance, convenience, and the strange tenderness of things that would look trivial in another story. So when we begin this lore journey, the most important thing to remember is that Frieren is a fantasy about the afterglow of an ending. It is a story in which the loudest battle has already happened, and what remains is the much quieter work of understanding what life meant while it was happening. That is why it suits ASMR so unusually well. Its deepest truths are not shouted, they are noticed. Origins and history. The oldest emotional history in Frieren belongs to the hero party itself. Himmel, Heiter, Eisen and Frieren are already figures of memory by the time the story opens properly, even when some of them are still alive. They are people whose greatest deed belongs to the past, and the series understands immediately that this makes them more moving, not less. They are legends who have already begun to vanish into story, and Frieren is the only one among them for whom that vanishing feels almost unbearably fast. Himmel matters especially because his role in the story is not only heroic, but interpretive. Official character material identifies him as the hero who defeated the Demon King with his party, and also tells you something simpler and warmer. He loved his companions deeply. That emotional generosity becomes one of the hidden lights of the whole series. Frieren spends so much of the story gradually realizing how much care was already around her, how often Himmel had seen value in fleeting moments, gestures, and memories that she treated as incidental simply because she believed time would always remain abundant. Heiter and Eisen are just as important to the tone of the world. Heiter, officially described as a priest who loved drink and laughter, and later became Fern's adoptive father, gives the series part of its gentle, worldly warmth. Eisen, still alive when the story begins, passes along his own apprentice, Stark, and nudges Frieren northward toward the place where the souls of the dead are said to rest. Through them, the old party does not simply disappear, it changes form. Their journey becomes a heritage that moves into younger hands. That destination in the north is Oriel, the resting place of souls, and significantly, the site of the Demon King's castle. In official volume material, it becomes the new vector of Frieren's life. She and Fern head north at Eisen's urging, and that landscape is never just a geographical path, it is a spiritual route through memory. To walk north is to move toward reunion, or perhaps toward the possibility of speaking to the dead, but it is also to retrace the old adventure, step by step, until its emotional meaning can finally be felt. Behind Frieren herself lies an even older line of history. The Shogakukan character page identifies Flam as Frieren's teacher, and Serie as Flammer's teacher and the founder of the Continental Magic Association. With that small chain, the series quietly suggests a lineage far older than the current road north, a lineage of magical inheritance, discipline, knowledge, and worldview that stretches across generations and species. Frieren is old, but she is also profoundly shaped by people even older and more distant than herself. That gives the series a deep temporal layering where even Frieren can stand between past and future rather than above them. This is one of the reasons the world feels so alive. Its history is not only political or military, it is personal, pedagogical and emotional. Masters shape apprentices, heroes shape the companions who survive them, priests raise orphaned mages, warriors leave behind students. The world after the Demon King is not static peace, it is a long inheritance of memories, techniques, regrets, and affections moving from one life into another. And because Frieren lives so long, she becomes a witness to those transfers in a uniquely painful way. Human beings enter her life, warm it, change it, and then become memory while she keeps walking. What the story slowly teaches her is that this does not make those lives small. It makes them dense. It gives them a kind of brightness that only someone like Frieren, standing almost outside ordinary human time, could fail to notice at first, and then spend the rest of the story learning to cherish. earlier systems in fantasy because it is powerful without being reduced to spectacle. Official character material calls Frieren a mage and, very bluntly, a magic obsessive. That small detail matters. She is not only a powerful wizard in the grand heroic sense, she is someone who loves magic in all its forms, including odd, minor, practical, and whimsical spells. That means the magical life in this series is not built only on warfare or hierarchy. It is built on collection, curiosity, use, and the preservation of strange little pieces of knowledge. Fern extends the atmosphere in a different direction. She is also a mage raised by Haida, and she travels with Frieren not simply as a student, but as a person shaped by discipline, routine, and care. In production terms, this is crucial for the ASMR tone. The magic in Frieren is often embedded in everyday gestures, in travel rhythm, in training, in quiet mastery. Even when large magical conflicts appear later, the world never loses that feeling that magic also belongs to ordinary life. It can be studied, it can be inherited, it can be saved, it can be used to solve ridiculous small problems, it can be treasured for reasons no battlefield would ever explain. Seria and Flam anchor the larger magical worldview. The official series page identifies Seria as the founder of the Continental Magic Association and a great mage, while Flam is explicitly Frieren's master. That immediately gives the world a sense of magical history, with schools, philosophies, institutions, and generational arguments built into it. Frieren is not just wandering through a fantasy world, collecting new spells in isolation. She is part of a long civilizational conversation about what magic is for, who should wield it, and what kinds of lives magic can build. The world itself deepens that feeling. The road north leads through villages, ruins, mountain paths, dangerous plateaus, canyons, and old sites once traversed by the original heroic party. In official volume terms, the northern plateau is especially important because it makes the old road return as both physical danger and memory space. Frieren is walking old familiar paths with new companions. That is the essential geography of the series. Places are not just new, they are layered. The path forward is always, in some way, also a path back. Even the magical institutions preserve this layered feeling. The first-class mage exam, introduced clearly in the official volume summaries, is not simply a tournament. It is a test of practical skill, teamwork, temperament, adaptation, and, eventually, judgment by Seria herself. The exam structure reminds you that the world after the great adventure still continues to sort power, authority, and legitimacy. Peace did not end history. It only changed the questions history asks. And all the while, somewhere behind the scenery, lies the series' central magical truth. Magic is bound to memory. Grimoires preserve vanished intentions. Apprentices preserve dead teachers. Spells survive empires. Ruins survive roads. A person like Frieren, who can live long enough to watch all of it pass, becomes not only a practitioner of magic but a vessel of continuity. She carries old knowledge into new time, even when she herself does not fully understand what the old time meant to her. This is why the ASMR version of Frieren's lore should never make magic feel too loud. Magic here is luminous, but often softly luminous. It belongs to campfires, books, stray errands, old promises, and the tiny acts of care that only reveal themselves as precious decades later. When the series does become spectacular, it does does so on top of that quieter foundation. The grandeur works because the gentleness was already there. Major journeys and events. The first great movement after Himmel's funeral is simple and profound. Frieren begins to walk again, but this time she is walking differently. Volume 1 frames the new adventure is an attempt to fulfill the final wishes of her old comrades, and Volume 2 makes the goal explicit. Frieren and Fern head north toward Oriel, where the souls of heroes are said to rest and where the Demon King's castle still stands. That path gives the whole middle of the story a soft inevitability. The destination is far away, but the emotional logic is exact. Frieren is not chasing glory, she is chasing understanding. Along the way, the old world proves that peace is never pure. Volume 2 notes that the Demon King is gone, but surviving minions still have unfinished business with Frieren. Volume 3 turns that tension into a more defined signpost with the return of Aura the Guillotine, one of the 7 Sages of Destruction. Even in spoiler light form, this matters because it tells you what kind of post-war world Frieren inhabits. Evil did not vanish all at once. The past remains active. Enemies remember. Old choices continue to reach forward. The journey also becomes more human and more tender through the addition of Stark. Official material identifies him as Eisen's apprentice, timid in temperament, but marked by the very qualities that define a warrior. This is important narratively because Stark shifts the story from remembrance alone toward continuation. He is not merely a new combat asset on the road north. He is the living proof that the old party's influence now moves through younger people, imperfectly and beautifully, rather than remaining sealed in memory. Then, later, the series passes into the first-class mage exam. Official volume descriptions show how this part of the story expands the world without abandoning the core emotional current. Frieren and Fern are split across teams. The test escalates from rare bird capture to a ruin expedition in the King's Tomb, and finally to series' decisive interview. Even at its most structured and competitive, the exam arc still feels like Frieren, because the tests reveal temperament and values as much as raw power. The world remains one where inner life cannot be separated cleanly from magical ability. After the exam, the road resumes. Volume 7's official summary explicitly sends Frieren, Fern and Stark back toward Oriel. Volume 8 places them in the northern plateau, a place Frieren once crossed with the legendary party and now crosses again with new friends. That is one of the series' most beautiful structural habits. It rarely moves in straight lines emotionally. Instead, it lets present travel brush against prior travel, so that every mile forward also feels like a contemplative rereading of a life already lived. Volume 9 introduces the cursed city and Marked of the Golden Land, with an explicit official note that Marked is the most powerful remaining member of the 7 Sages of Destruction, and that he has a significant connection to Denken. This is a perfect example of how Frieren grows larger without losing its soul. The world becomes more politically and magically dense, yet the series still frames even its danger in terms of relationship, memory, and unfinished human stories. The Cursed City is not just a set piece, it is another place where the past remains active, and if you glance at the current official series page, you can see the story continues that same spirit. Frieren and her party are now in the imperial capital under the Continental Magic Association, trying to stop a plot against Syria while caught between the magic special forces and the shadow warriors. It is a larger, more political signpost, but it still belongs to the same journey, a road through memory, institutions, danger, and the persistent challenge of understanding lives that intersect only briefly and still leave permanent marks. Frieren herself is the axis of the whole work, but not because she dominates every room in the ordinary protagonist sense. She is compelling because she is slow to understand what the world has been giving her. Official material describes her as long-lived, dry in demeanour, and deeply obsessed with magic. What the story adds, over time, is the realization that beneath the dryness lies not emptiness but delay. Frieren feels deeply. She simply lives on such a long scale that recognition comes later than it does for everyone around her. The whole series is, in one sense, the story of those delayed recognitions finally arriving. Himmel is the opposite kind of force. He is already dead, already part memory, already a person known mostly through afterlight, and yet he may be the emotional centre of the series. Officially, he is the hero of the old party, and someone who loved his companions. In practice, he becomes the measure against which Frieren slowly learns what attention, kindness, and presence actually look like. He reminds the story that what matters most in a life is often not how grand the quest was, but how carefully one person stood beside another while it was happening. Fern is one of the reasons the story stays grounded. Officially, she is a mage raised by Heiter, and she travels with Frieren, while often managing, correcting, or steadying her. That description sounds simple, but it contains something essential. Fern is a human scale constantly beside Frieren. She represents routine, expectation, discipline, and the ordinary weight of days. She is not just a student. She is one of the clearest ways the series teaches Frieren how to live in time with another person. Stark brings another necessary energy: fear, courage, awkwardness, and warmth. The official page calls him very timid, yet also says that this very quality speaks to his fitness as a warrior. That paradox is beautifully Frieren. Strength here is rarely clean bravado. It is often tenderness carrying fear anyway. Stark helps keep the series human, slightly clumsy, and deeply alive. He also gives the travelling trio a rhythm that feels like found family, rather than like a perfect heroic formation. Heiter and Eisen continue to shape the road long after the old party's era has passed. Heiter raises Fern and leaves behind a spiritual and emotional inheritance as much as a practical one. Eisen, still living, directs Frieren north and entrusts Stark to the next stage of the journey. In both cases, the old heroes remain active through people rather than through monuments. Their real legacy is not only the world they saved, but the lives they made possible afterward. Flam and Ciri widen the canvas enormously. Flam is Frieren's teacher, and Ciri is Flam's teacher and the founder of the Continental Magic Association. In that lineage, you can feel the story stretching backward across ages. Frieren is ancient by human standards, and still she is also a disciple. Ciri, especially, introduces another way of measuring magical time and value. Her presence makes the magical world feel stratified, philosophical, and older than most fantasy institutions have time to become. Then there are figures like Zain, Denken, and us how broad the series' emotional palette has become. Sein is a worldly village priest who joins and later leaves to pursue his own road. Denken is a first-class mage and a court magician with childhood ties to Macht. Macht is not just another enemy, but a being whose history presses directly into the lives of present people. Together, they show how Frieren has grown beyond a 2 or 3 person meditation into a wider ecosystem of memory, status, travel, danger, and old debts. Reflective close. In the end, Frieren is not really a story about what it took to defeat the Demon King. It is a story about what it means to continue living after the great event that once seemed large enough to define everything. The official descriptions never hide this. They keep returning to the same core image. The adventure is over, but life goes on. That is not a marketing line. It is the thesis of the work. Most fantasy stories ask how a hero saves the world. Frieren asks what happens after the world has already been saved and the people who saved it begin to separate, age, die, or become memory. It asks how a being with immense time ahead of her can learn to value lives that flame brightly and vanish fast. It asks whether regret can become gentleness, whether recollection can become attention, and whether journeying backward through memory can also become the only honest way to move forward. Those questions are why the story remains so quiet even when its world expands, and perhaps that is why the road north feels so haunting. Oriel, the place where souls rest, is not merely a fantasy destination. It is the shape given to longing. It is the answer a world invents when it cannot bear the finality of separation, and yet still wishes to move toward the dead with dignity rather than desperation. Frieren walks north because she finally understands that losing someone after failing to know them fully is his own kind of sorrow. The road is her answer to that sorrow. So if this story leaves you quiet, it is because it is built from quiet recognitions. A hand once held out and not fully noticed. A smile now understood, decades too late. A teacher's instruction preserved in a spell. A road taken once in youth and taken again in mourning. A companion who seemed brief and now fills the entire sky of memory. Frieren does not ask us to fear time. It asks us to feel it. And in that feeling, the series becomes something more than a fantasy after story. It becomes a meditation on companionship itself, on the fact that a life can change not only because of what was accomplished, but because of who stood beside you while you were too busy, too young, too distracted, or too immortal to understand what was happening. That is the tenderness at the centre of Frieren. Not that the past can return, but that the living can still learn how to honour it. So the last image worth leaving with is not the Demon King's castle, not the cursed city, not the exam hall, not the imperial capital, and not even the road to Oriel. It is something smaller. It is Frieren,